Hi, this is I'll Explain. This time I will explain the GM-Intercept Custom. GM-Intercept Custom, model number RGM-79KC, is an excellent example of less is more. GM-Intercept Custom is one of many GM customs that the Federation Force developed to meet the frontline requirements during the One-Year War. Like we have covered, the GM was developed with maximum availability in mind, with its performance kept at a relatively tame level. Having said that, GM's base performance isn't bad and is even comparable to Zeon's late war mobile suits. However, on the field of battle, for soldiers who have their lives on the line, they want all the advantages they can get. This is in no conflict with the Federation Command, as they too want as many advantages as they can get as well, so long it doesn't put them at a disadvantage in other areas. So the Federation decided to allow and support the development and production of modified GMs in limited quantities for ace pilots and specialist combat teams, commonly referred to as customs. The goal was to make this GM Customs performance comparable to Gundam, a series of proven prototypes that had overcome many challenges from Zeon, but without investing the same amount of resource for mass-producing Gundam. Or more accurately, interrupting the production of GM. While this seems to be a wishful thinking, it isn't as far-fetched as it seems. GM, after all, is still a Gundam model, or rather modeled after Gundam. That is to say, it has the same architecture as the Gundam, just revised and built with more generous parameters for the ease of deployment, production, and maintenance. The goal wasn't about building Gundam out of GM, but rather building GMs that can perform certain missions that otherwise require a Gundam to perform. That is to say, if these GM customs can perform one or few type of missions as good as a Gundam would, it is considered adequate and accepted as standard improvements. And thus, for intercept missions, the GM-Intercept Custom was developed. Intercept mission in One-Year War is not too different from traditional aircraft intercept mission. Set up a very fast machine that can accelerate to set speed in short time frame, that has a long enough operation range to keep the threat at arm's length from the intended target. However, all these things are better done with a traditional space jet than a mobile suit. That is, until Federation realized they can strap a set of space jet's jet engine on the back of a GM to send the GM out for interception. So why go through all the effort to have GM intercept to begin with? In short, cost. While Federation has some excellent space jet like Core Booster that can match or even outmatch other mobile suits during the One-Year War, they are still relatively expensive compared to the GM, and jet engines stripped from obsolete space jets. Although pilots who are qualified for intercept missions are less than satisfied with the baseline GM's performance, so they also get the custom treatment. What we have here is the GM-Intercept Custom without the extra jet engine set, known as Follow Booster, attached. And this setup is probably the more common setup GM-Intercept Custom was deployed with. That is because by the time Federation deployed the GM-Intercept Custom, they were already on the offensive. Zeon has shifted their targets from Federation military base to their fleet, and carrying the Follow Booster means the ship was carrying one less mobile suit. Not to mention, a fleet's secured perimeter are far smaller than a military base, and the GM-Intercept Custom was plenty fast enough. Let's take a closer look and see what custom was made to allow GM to intercept. Starting from the head, immediately we can see a visor on top of the GM's visor. This extra visor is added to protect the head, where the important main optic sensors are. These sensors also get some upgrade, or rather not downgrade, to regular GM standard, as Federation was using better optics on their prototypes before they settle on the base GM standard. So they don't need all the exposures like baseline GM does, despite the visor being partially blocked. A long antenna is added for improved communications. While this was originally done for long-range intercept mission, it is still useful in fleet combat where Minofuski interference would be the densest. The head is otherwise the same as baseline GM since this is built from one. Next we look at the chest. The GM Intercept Custom's chest is mostly the same as GM's, except it has more armor, especially around the cockpit and near the chest vents. This is done to improve pilot survivability, since pilots of the GM Custom would either be ace pilots or specialists that Federation would rather not lose, more so than their regular pilots. Under the hood, the main reactor are once again upgraded, matching those used on Gundams. Same goes for the cooling system to allow GM Intercept Custom maintain its Gundam-like performance. This is possible because GM does not have the core fighter and had a lot of fine mechanism removed for cost reduction, allowing it to be fitted with larger reactor and cooling system that does not cost as much as those installed in Gundams. There are also extra RPG motors to improve the GM Intercept Custom's agility. The skirts are more or less the same as baseline GMs, or rather early production GMs, characterized by the indent with a V-mark like the Gundam, often replaced by a flat slab instead. This indent is done for a ventilator to either exhaust heat coolant or pass through air around the environment as an auxiliary cooling system. This means the GM Intercept Custom is expected to be operating in high intensity for extended amount of time, if 1 year war mobile suit combat are not high intensity and long compared to traditional dogfights and armor combat to begin with. Moving down to the legs, GM Intercept Custom looks like a baseline GM, at least on the front. The back is where the customizations are shown. Instead of thrusters hidden underneath the armor at the back of the calf, or replaced with simple RPG motors, it is a fixed twin nozzle thrusters. This is another place to show Federation's style of improving GM with these customs, using simpler parts with similar performance to those used on Gundams in order to match the latter. This approach loses the flexibility and versatility available on Gundams, but it does keep GM Customs costs down, and Federation would rather have 2 GM Customs than 1 Gundam, let alone they could probably have 5 to 10 for simpler custom like GM Intercept Custom. Moving up to the arms, the GM Intercept Custom once again uses early production parts characterized by the RPG motor on the shoulder armor. Going around the back, GM Intercept Custom had no beam saber rack or heavy weaponry rack on the backpack, leaving these hardpoints available to attach the fellow booster. A beam saber clamp is added on the back skirt latch. It can turn freely, so GM Intercept Custom can draw the beam saber from left to right. Since we are talking about the beam saber, we should talk about the rest of GM Intercept Custom's arsenal. A full gun and a beam spray gun. Both weapons are standard as they are on baseline GM, although with improved internals, GM Intercept Custom are more proficient with them. Yes, GM Intercept Custom doesn't even have a shield. They can carry one if needed, but they don't with their regular loadout. Opted to go lightweight in order to maximize their acceleration and speed. The GM Intercept Custom is expected to hop between battle lines where regular GM with shields are holding the front, and GM Intercept Custom would flank with their speed. Like we have talked in detail about beam stray guns in the video about baseline GM, this is a mid-short range weapon designed to use volume of fire to find their mark. While the beam saber is the main weapon that can cut down enemy mobile suits efficiently. This is no different for the GM Intercept Custom. Sure, it gains a bit of weight with extra armor and extra thrusters, but GM starts off lighter, and by not carrying a shield, the GM Intercept Custom has a higher thrust to weight ratio than RX-78 in standard loadout. Like we have mentioned, most GM Intercept Custom were deployed in this base configuration, including those converging on R-Power Cool. No known unit or ace pilot were using them at the time this video is made, but Federation did have quite a few GM variants during and after the 1 year war with similar minimalist loadout accepted for limited production. It is reasonable to assure that GM Intercept Custom was well liked. It also proves that the Federation had the right idea with GM, keeping it mobile and agile, the very edge mobile suit has against space jets in the first place. It is hard to tell if GM Intercept Custom was deployed on Earth during the war, but it wouldn't be a surprise as there are quite a few boosted thruster-packed GM variants operating on Earth, and we should cover those and possible GM Intercept Custom ground type if they do exist. Thanks for watching.